How much time and energy have you spent obsessing over text messages? What to text? How often? Why haven't you heard from this person? If you're anything like me, it's quite a lot. And this is a surprisingly common situation people find themselves in, really obsessing and anxiously wondering about these things, whether you're dating or in a relationship. So I want to give you some very real tools to obsess and worry less over communication. The first thing you want to do if you find yourself obsessing over what to text somebody, how often, why you haven't heard from them, is to take a few breaths. And I don't mean, oh, just take a deep breath, everything will be fine. It's not like that. I mean, taking a few very intentional breaths to feel everything that you're feeling and start to regulate yourself and start to soothe some of that anxious, obsessive energy so that it doesn't take over your communication. When you can sit and breathe for a moment, give yourself that moment to feel everything you're feeling and work with it and regulate it a little bit, it already starts to soothe some of that stuff. So then it doesn't come out in your communication and you aren't saying, or less often maybe, you're saying things like, what's wrong? Are we okay? Or are you even interested in me? Why don't you respond? These sorts of things are coming from that anxious energy, that anxious, obsessive energy that you haven't regulated for yourself. So when you can take these few moments to breathe very intentionally and feel that stuff, you can make a more informed decision about how to proceed. And it doesn't come out in your communication in these ways that are less healthy. When I say breathing intentionally, I mean making the space within yourself to feel all of these things. And there's a very specific technique that I'll give you at the end of the video, as well as some other tips for emotional regulation, because emotional regulation is the number one thing you can do to improve connection and communication with another person. So stay tuned for that. Now that you are starting to regulate a little bit and soothe your own anxious, obsessive energy for yourself, you need to be really honest with yourself about why you want the communication that you want. How often, what kind of communication, the depth and engagement. These are the things that are likely driving some of that anxious energy in the first place. And it's important to be honest about what kind of communication you want. Here's what I mean. You may find that once you are regulated and you can be honest with yourself about why you want the communication you want, you really just want a response from that person some number of times per day. So I recommend asking yourself, do you want to engage in a conversation or do you just want to get a response? If you're dating, do you want to express interest with this person and expand the connection, or do you want to confirm their interest by getting a response? These are important questions to ask yourself, and it's okay. I want to be very clear that it's perfectly normal to just want that little bit of validation, to know that they will respond when you text them. It's important to be honest with yourself about it because it drives your behavior and it drives your expectations. If you can be honest with yourself that, some number of times per day, you just kind of want to see that person's name pop up on your phone because it feels good to know that they are still there, then you don't have to think as much about what to text them. You can just send them a picture of whatever you're doing right now, or some meme that a friend sent you, or a couple of emojis, just to make sure you send them something to start to soothe some of that anxiety. And then you get a response, and it doesn't have to be very much of a response, because you've now acknowledged for yourself that you just want to see their name pop up on your phone. And now that you're being honest with yourself about the kind of communication you want, and that a lot of the time you just want a response from them, you get to see that some of the time, you get to see how often you actually want to engage in a deeper conversation and maybe plan your next date, or have an important conversation that you've been wanting to have, or ask them something important about the relationship. Whatever it is, there is some frequency with which you want to connect a little bit more deeply. And you get to know now the difference between that and just kind of wanting a response from them. Now that you are starting to regulate yourself and that anxious, obsessive energy a little bit by breathing and giving yourself a moment, and you're starting to know the difference between just kind of wanting to grab a little bit of their attention, just kind of wanting a response from them because it feels good, versus, no, I actually want to engage a little bit more deeply and build some more connection here, you get to be honest with yourself. You need to be honest with yourself about realistic expectations for how often that deeper engagement can happen. And this is important because your lives are probably different. People's lives are complex, and we have different levels of time and energy for connection in our lives. We get into trouble if we start to just expect other people to have the same amount of time and energy for connection and for communication that we do. This is where a lot of communication breakdowns happen, because people are just mismatched in this way and they don't even realize it, because they haven't taken the time to soothe and regulate themselves before figuring out what their expectations actually are. And this is where a lot of people end up coming to me for help with communication practices and self-regulation practices. So be honest with yourself about where each of you are at in your life and how much time and space there is in your lives for communication. I'll give you an example to put it into context for you from my own relationship. When we first started dating, my partner was in a clinical graduate program, which meant she had basically a full-time job at a clinical placement and then many hours of coursework to do in the evenings. So she didn't have anywhere near as much time and space in her day as I did to be texting, to be exchanging meaningful information and jokes and stuff. There were, so of course there were memes and emojis here and there, but it was often 2 or 3 days before I heard from her, before she had the space and the time to respond to something I had sent and to engage with a conversation about planning our next date. And I'll be perfectly honest with you, in the first couple of months, this made me pretty anxious. I felt a lot of that anxious, obsessive energy, wondering, is she as interested as I think she is? Is she like talking to a bunch of other people and that's why she doesn't have as much time? But once I was able to breathe and soothe my own anxiety a little bit, not perfectly, of course, I could then remind myself, step back and be honest with myself about, okay, I would like to have a meaningful conversation with her every day, and that's not super realistic for her right now because of how busy she is. Meanwhile, I'm working as an independent contractor in a school, and I'm off work at 3 p.m. every day and don't take any work home with me. So I've got all of this time and space to be connecting. And when I was able to regulate myself enough to step back and be honest about that mismatch, it helped me to stop obsessing so much. And knowing that I was going to hear from her in 2 or 3 days, that there was a consistency. There might not have been the frequency that I wanted, which was daily, but there was consistency. I knew I was going to hear from her every 2 or 3 days, and then we would get to plan our next date. That helped a lot. So these are things that you can do for yourself. But remember, the very first step is to take a few deep breaths and regulate yourself, because everything else follows from that. You can't see the difference between just kind of wanting a response and, no, I want to engage, or I want to plan our next date, or I want to have an important conversation. You don't get to see that difference if your anxiety is running the show and taking over your communication. And you don't get to step back and look at, honestly, the differences in how your lives are structured right now and how much time and space you each have for the communication. If your anxiety is running the show, you're just sitting there wondering why they haven't responded yet. So that breathing practice that I want to recommend for you is really quite simple. If you want to follow along with something, there's plenty of examples online. I'll give you a little demonstration of it, but the basic principle is to inhale and then hold for a couple of seconds and then really slowly exhale. You are making the exhale longer, hopefully twice as long as the inhale. And what this does is physically lowers your heart rate and over time lowers cortisol levels, even just for doing this for a minute or two. So you're now less stressed. You are regulating, literally soothing your nervous system just by exhaling longer than you inhale. If you are familiar with box breath, I like to recommend a modified box breath. This is for people who want to count and add some structure to this. Some people can just kind of visualize exhaling longer than the inhale, but if you want a little bit more structure, I recommend inhaling for 4 seconds, holding for 2 seconds, exhaling for 8, hold for 4 seconds in the empty state, and repeat. The very first one that you do is going to feel kind of weird, but you might already feel a little bit of settling. And you really only need 3, 4, 5 of these breaths to get a lot more calm in your body. And then you can ask yourself those important questions that I recommended. So please give this a try. I hope it helps you to obsess and worry less over communication. Let me know how it goes.